Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is great to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Today, we are opening up a stack of research that is, well, it's arguably about the most personal topic possible. It's about family. But not your immediate family. We aren't talking about your cousins or your siblings or anything like that. We are zooming out.
Way, way out.
Way out. We are looking at the ultimate family reunion.
The one where literally everyone is invited, whether they like it or not.
Exactly. We are tackling two of the most famous names in all of human history. Names that carry a massive amount of weight, a lot of cultural baggage, and frankly, a huge amount of misunderstanding.
Absolutely.
We are talking about Adam and Eve.
But, and we should say this right at the top, before anyone checks their feed to see if they accidentally subscribe to a theology lecture or a Sunday school class,
Right.
we should clarify immediately, this is not a religious discussion. We are not talking about the Garden of Eden or serpents or forbidden fruit.
Yeah.
None of that.
No. We are looking at a genetic detective story. A cold case, really. We are strictly looking at the science behind this so-called mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosomal Adam.
Which are, you know, the scientific titles given to the specific woman and the specific man from whom all living humans descend.
The mother of all of us and the father of all of us, biologically speaking. And for the longest time, the science on this was, well, it was a bit of a puzzle. It didn't quite fit together. It was actually a massive paradox for a while.
It was. I mean, for decades, the data suggested that these two ancestors, these 2 points on the map, lived thousands and thousands of years apart.
So the narrative was that they couldn't have met.
Never. Yeah. Not even close. The idea was that they were ships passing in the evolutionary night, separated by, you know, entire geological ages.
But that narrative has completely changed.
Yeah.
We have a massive stack of research today, papers from Stanford University, deep dives into specific haplogroups, evolutionary coalescence theory.
And some really fascinating data on population bottlenecks that we'll get into.
And all this new data has completely rewritten that timeline.
It really has. We're going to look at how new discoveries, and specifically one incredible discovery regarding the Y chromosome, have just totally recalibrated the clock.
So we might find that Adam and Eve were walking the earth at the same time after all.
It's looking more and more like they were, at the very least, contemporaries.
I love that. It's like the ultimate cold case file, but all the clues are hidden inside our own cells. So let's unpack this. To understand how we find these two ancestors, we have to start with the tools, because we aren't just looking at regular DNA, are we?
No.
Like, if you send a saliva kit to one of those ancestry companies, you get a pie chart of your ethnicity.
Yeah.
But that's not really what we're talking about here, is it?
No, not at all. That is, you know, that's surface level stuff. It's interesting, but it's very recent history. To find Adam and Eve, we have to bypass the chaos, really, of standard DNA. Yeah. See, most of your genome, the nuclear DNA that resides in the nucleus of your cells, the stuff that decides if you have blue eyes or curly hair or, you know, a susceptibility to high cholesterol, that stuff is actually terrible for tracing deep history.
Why is that? I mean, that is the vast majority of our genetic code. You'd think more data would be better.
You would think so, but it's messy. Think of it this way. Every time a child is born, the DNA from the mother and the father gets shuffled together. It's a process called recombination.
Okay, like shuffling two decks of cards.
Exactly like that. Imagine you take a red deck, that's mom's contribution, and a blue deck, that's dad's, and you shuffle them together perfectly. The child is that mixed deck.
A purple deck.
A purple deck, right. Then the child grows up, takes their purple deck, finds a partner with, say, a green deck, and shuffles again. What do you have then?
A mess, a brownish, chaotic mix. After just a few generations, the original red deck is completely scattered.
Completely. The original order is gone forever. You can't look at a specific card, say the King of Hearts, and easily trace it back to that original red deck from 1,000 years ago. It's a soup of ancestors. You are a little bit of everyone.
So if we want to find one specific ancestor from hundreds of thousands of years ago,
you need a different tool.
We need a part of our DNA that doesn't shuffle. We need a deck that stays in order generation after generation.
Precisely. We need a signal that cuts through all that noise. And biologically, we're incredibly lucky because we have two of them, one for the maternal line and one for the paternal line.
Just shortcuts.
The shortcuts. Let's start with the mother's shortcut. Mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA.
This is the powerhouse of the cell, right?
Yeah.
Biology 101 coming back to haunt us all.
It is, yeah. The mitochondria, they sit outside the nucleus of the cell in what's called the cytoplasm. They generate the energy your body needs to function. But the crucial thing for our detective story is that mtDNA is passed down strictly from the mother.
Strictly from the mother. So the father contributes nothing to this part of the cell.
Essentially, yes. It's a fascinating biological quirk. Sperm cells do have mitochondria. I mean, they need a lot of energy to swim to the egg, but they are located in the tail of the sperm.
The engine room.
The engine room, exactly. And when fertilization happens, that tail usually just falls off. Or, if it does get inside, the egg has mechanisms to actively seek out and destroy the paternal mitochondria.
Wow, ruthless.
Very. So the fertilized egg only keeps the mother's mitochondria.
So if I'm a man, I have my mother's mtDNA.
You do.
But I don't pass it to my kids.
Correct. Your mitochondrial lineage stops with you. It's a dead end from that perspective.
Yeah.
But a woman passes it to all of her children, her daughters then pass it to their children, and so on and so on.
So it creates this single, unbroken thread.
A perfect, unbroken thread connecting you to your mother, her mother, all the way back. It never, ever gets shuffled with the father's DNA.
That is an incredibly clean line of sight. It's like a surname. If surnames were passed down by women and never changed by marriage or anything else?
That's a perfect analogy. And there's another feature that makes it perfect for this kind of work. It evolves fast. The mutation rate, the rate at which little typos appear in the genetic code, is much higher in mtDNA than in nuclear DNA.
Okay, now why is a high mutation rate a good thing? Usually when we talk about mutations in movies, it's, bad news. It's zombies or superheroes.
Right, but in population genetics, mutations are information. They are ticks on a clock. Every time a typo happens, it's like a new tick mark.
A breadcrumb.
A breadcrumb, exactly. The source material mentions that mtDNA substitutes at a rate of about 0.02 substitutions per base per million years. Now, that sounds super technical, but all it really means is that changes happen frequently enough that we can distinguish between relatively recent lineages.
So if the clock ticked too slowly, everyone's mtDNA would look pretty much identical.
Exactly. If the DNA never changed, every human on Earth would have identical mtDNA, and we couldn't tell who branched off when. We couldn't build a family tree at all. But because it ticks relatively fast, we can distinguish a lineage that branched off 10,000 years ago from one that branched off 50,000 years ago, just based on how many typos have accumulated in each line.
Okay, so mtDNA is the fast clock for the mother's side. What about the father's side? We need a shortcut for the men.
We do. And that's the Y-chromosome. And this is the other exception to the shuffling rule. As you know, the Y-chromosome is what determines male sex, and it is passed only from father to son.
And does it shuffle? I know women have two X chromosomes that can swap information, but men have an X and a Y. They're not a matched pair.
Mostly, no. There are very small tips of the Y chromosome, they're called pseudoautosomal regions, that do swap a little bit of info with the X chromosome to make sure things line up during cell division. But the vast majority of it, over 95%, the non-recombining portion...
The NRY.
The NRY, right. It passes down as a whole unit. It's a monolith. A son gets a near-perfect copy of his father's Y chromosome, who got it from his father, and so on.
Another clean line, just for the men.
Another clean line.
But the sources say the Y chromosome is a bit different from the mitochondrial DNA in terms of size and, I guess, speed.
A huge difference. The Y chromosome is about 60 million base pairs long. It's a massive genetic document. The mitochondrial genome is tiny by comparison, only about 16,500 base pairs.
Wow, that's a massive difference.
It is. But historically, the Y chromosome was harder to use as a clock because it mutates much more slowly. So there are fewer ticks, fewer breadcrumbs over the same period of time.
So we have a fast clock for the moms and a slow clock for the dads.
Yeah.
We have our tools, but having the data isn't enough. You have to know how to read it. How do scientists actually use these two unbroken threads to find one person, one Adam, and one Eve?
They use a mathematical framework called coalescence theory.
Coalescence.
Yeah, it's a beautiful concept, really. The source material uses a great analogy here that I think really clarifies it. Chain letters.
Chain letters. Like those old emails that said, forward this to 10 people or you'll have bad luck for 7 years.
Exactly those.
Yeah.
Or go back even further to physical letters sent through the mail. Imagine a chain letter starts circulating in, say, 1990. One person writes the original document. It's perfect. They send it to 10 friends.
No.
Those friends then copy it and send it to 10 more. But people are human. They make mistakes when they retype it.
Typos. Just like the mutations.
Precisely. One person types te instead of the. Now, all 10 people who receive the letter from that person get the version with the te typo. All the other branches of the chain letter family tree still have the original the.
Okay, I see where this is going. And then 5 years later, someone in that te group accidentally adds a comma where it doesn't belong.
Right, so now you have a subgroup, a sublineage, of the chain letter family tree that has both the te typo and the extra comma.
So if a detective gathered up all the thousands of chain letters circulating today, they could look at the shared typos and work backward.
Exactly. It's like a family tree of mistakes. They could group them. Okay, these 500 letters have the TED typo, so they all descend from branch A. These other 500 don't, so they come from branch B. As you move backward in time, looking for the source of each typo, the branches merge.
The line with the extra comma merges back into the main tell line.
And then the tell line merges back with the line. Eventually, all the lines of all those different versions would coalesce.
They'd merge.
Back to the single original document, the one with no typos.
And the person who wrote that original document is the most recent common ancestor of all the letters.
Exactly. For mtDNA, that original author is mitochondrial Eve. For the Y chromosome, it's Y chromosomal Adam. All the diversity we see today in our mtDNA and Y chromosomes are just typos that accumulated over thousands of years, all pointing back to one original text.
Okay, so let's meet her. Let's meet mitochondrial Eve. Who was she? Because the biggest misconception, and the sources are very, very clear on this, is that she was the only woman alive at the time. The Eve of the Garden of Eden.
Yes, we have to debunk that immediately and forcefully. The name Eve is, frankly, a little unfortunate because it invokes that image of a world with exactly two people.
A lonely world.
Right. But mitochondrial Eve lived in a world teeming with humans. There were thousands, probably tens of thousands of other women alive at the same time she was. They were hunting, gathering, raising children, laughing, and struggling to survive just like she was.
So why is she the Eve? What happened to all the other women? Why aren't we descended from them, at least on this one specific maternal line?
We might be descended from them in other ways, through our nuclear DNA, that soup we talked about. Their genes are definitely still with us. But in terms of the pure maternal line, that unbroken mtDNA thread, their lineages died out.
Died out how? Did they just not have kids?
Not necessarily. It's a mathematical game of chance called lineage extinction. It's almost inevitable over long periods. Think about it. To pass on your mtDNA, you must have a daughter.
Ah, right.
If a woman had 10 sons, she was incredibly successful reproductively, a matriarch of a huge clan. But her mtDNA line ended right there with her. It was a genetic dead end.
Because the sons don't pass it on.
Correct. Or imagine she had a daughter, but that daughter only had sons. The line ends in the second generation. Or maybe she has a daughter who has a daughter, but 5 generations down the line, someone in that chain only has sons.
So it's a constant game of chance. You have to flip heads. Have at least one daughter, who then goes on to have a daughter, every single generation forever.
It is. A single tails flip. A generation with no daughters, and your entire mitochondrial line, stretching back to the dawn of humanity, is gone forever.
Wow.
That's why scientists sometimes call her the lucky mother. She wasn't necessarily stronger or smarter or more beautiful than her peers. She was just the one whose female line descendants never broke the chain.
She just kept winning the lottery.
She kept winning the genetic lottery. Every other woman living at that time eventually had a generation where no daughters were produced, or the line simply went extinct due to environmental factors like a famine, a disease, an accident.
That is wild to think about. We're all here because of one single unbroken chain of daughters that managed to survive every predator, every winter, every pandemic, every war for hundreds of thousands of years.
It's humbling, isn't it?
It is. So where did this lucky mother live, and when?
The genetic evidence points very strongly to Africa. Specifically, when we look at the diversity of mitochondrial DNA today, the deepest, oldest branches, the ones with the most accumulated typos closest to the root, are found exclusively in African populations.
So the trunk of the tree is in Africa.
The trunk and all the oldest branches, specifically a macrohaplogroup called L0. This lineage is found at its highest frequencies in the Khoisan peoples of Southern Africa, for example. So the consensus is that she likely lived somewhere in East or South Africa.
Okay, and the date. This is where things start to get controversial, right? I know when this first hit the news in the 80s, it was a massive story.
It was on the cover of Newsweek. The original 1987 study by Can, Stoneking, and Wilson was a landmark. They estimated she lived between 140,000 and 200,000 years ago.
And that was a shock at the time.
A huge shock. It was a powerful confirmation of the out-of-Africa model of human origins, that all modern humans share a recent African origin, which was still being debated at the time.
Recent being a very relative term, of course.
Of course. But newer studies, like the ones from Stanford and others cited in our stack, have refined this. They have better methods for calibrating the mutation rate, the speed of the clock. They're now looking at a range of roughly 99,000 to 148,000 years ago.
So slightly more recent than we originally thought, but still firmly rooted in that Middle Stone Age period in Africa.
Exactly. A time of dramatic climate shifts, a time when modern human behaviors were really starting to emerge.
There's a really interesting concept in the sources that I want to touch on before we move to Adam. The idea that Eve isn't a fixed person, like the title can move.
Yes, this is a mind bender, but it's essential to understanding what we're talking about. Mitochondrial Eve is a title, not a static, specific, historic figure. It's a role.
Yeah, a role.
Yeah. The title is the most recent common ancestor of all currently living humans. The key word there is currently. Imagine a woman living today who is the mitochondrial Eve. If one of the ancient distinct lineages dies out tomorrow...
Okay, let's say the last woman on Earth carrying a specific rare variation of mtDNA dies without a daughter.
Exactly. That branch of the human family tree is now gone forever. That means the coalescence point for everyone who is left moves forward in time.
Because we have fewer, more closely related lineages to trace back.
Precisely. The tree just got trimmed. As the outer branches fall off, the point where all the remaining branches join up moves higher up the trunk, closer to the present. So the Eve of 100,000 years ago might not be the Eve of 100,000 years from now. If lineages die out, the title could jump to one of her daughters or granddaughters or great-granddaughters.
So Eve is a shifting target. That's fascinating. Okay, now let's bring in Adam.
Oh.
Because for a long, long time, he was the problem child of this family tree.
He really was. He was the piece of the puzzle that refused to fit. The timeline just didn't make sense.
What was the issue? Why was he such a problem?
Well, for decades, as scientists analyzed the Y-chromosome, the data consistently suggested that Y-chromosomal Adam lived much, much more recently than Eve.
How much more recently?
We're talking estimates of, 50,000 to maybe 115,000 years ago in some of the older papers.
So if Eve is roughly 150,000 years old, maybe a bit younger, and Adam is, say, 60,000 years old, that's a nearly 100,000-year gap.
Exactly. It's a chasm. It implied they never met. It implied that the male common ancestor of all living men was walking around tens of thousands of years after the female common ancestor of all living people. It was baffling.
What were the theories for that? Did they think male lineages just died out faster?
Actually, yes, that was one of the leading theories. And there's a good biological and social reason to think that might be the case. It's a concept called polygyny, or more broadly, high reproductive variance among males.
Meaning some men have tons and tons of kids, and a lot of other men have none at all.
Precisely. In many societies, historically, the reproductive success of men varies much more than women. Most women who reach reproductive age will have at least some children. But for men, it can be much more skewed.
Right, you could have a social structure with a powerful chieftain, or a king, or a warlord who has dozens of wives and hundreds of children.
Genghis Khan being the classic, if perhaps exaggerated, example.
Right. And at the same time, many other men in that society are completely shut out of reproduction. They have no wives, no children.
And if that happens, you lose Y-chromosome diversity very, very fast.
Because if one guy has 50 sons, his Y-chromosome floods the market. And if 10 other guys have 0 sons, their unique Y-chromosomes just vanish from the gene pool forever.
Precisely. This effectively shrinks the effective population size of breeding males. If male lineages die out much more frequently and aggressively than female lineages, the coalescence point, the Adam, would naturally be much more recent. The male side of the family tree is being pruned much more aggressively than the female side.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Like a lawnmower on the male side versus a careful pair of scissors on the female side.
A very good way to put it. So for a long time, that was the story. Adam was young, Eve was old, they never met. End of story.
But then something happened around 2013 that changed everything, the peri-Y chromosome. This is my favorite part of the story because it shows how science isn't just done in, ivory towers and universities. It's done by regular people being curious.
It is a remarkable discovery, truly serendipitous. It started with a man named Albert Perry, an African-American man living in South Carolina. He had passed away, but one of his female relatives wanted to trace the family tree.
A very common thing to do.
Very common. She submitted his DNA for analysis to a commercial testing company, Family Tree DNA, just a standard genealogy test, like millions of people do.
Right. And usually these tests come back and they say, you are haplogroup R or
Right.
you are haplogroup E. They fit you into the known family tree of humanity.
They find your branch. But when the results came back for Albert Perry, the technicians in the lab were baffled. His Y chromosome didn't fit anywhere.
What do you mean it didn't fit? It wasn't human.
Oh, it was human, but it was genetically distinct from every other known Y chromosome in their massive database. It was. It was off the charts. It didn't connect to any of the known branches.
That must have been a moment of like panic in the lab. Did we break the machine? Is the sample contaminated?
Literally. That's what they thought. They ran it again. Same result. They had to send it for much deeper sequencing at a research university. And it turned out that Albert Perry carried a Y chromosomal lineage, now called haplogroup S00, that split off from the rest of the human family tree much, much earlier than anyone had ever expected.
How much earlier are we talking?
We're talking about an earthquake in the field. It pushed the root of the entire Y chromosome tree back by a stunning amount. Before Perry, the tree coalesced around, let's say, 100,000 years ago. With Perry's lineage included, the coalescence point jumped way back. Initial estimates were as high as 338,000 years ago.
300,000 years, but...
Now, that's been recalibrated and revised downward a bit since then to maybe the 200,000 to 300,000 year range. But the point is, it was a fundamental rewriting of the timeline.
That is astounding. One guy in South Carolina holds the key to deep human history. Where did his ancestors come from?
That was the next logical question. This was clearly an ancient African lineage, so researchers went looking for this specific genetic signature in Africa. They eventually found a small number of men, among the Imbo people of Western Cameroon, who also carried this Azero lineage.
So it survived.
It had survived, quietly, for millennia, hidden in a small population in Cameroon, until the transatlantic slave trade carried one of its descendants to South Carolina, and his relative, centuries later, decided to take a DNA test.
That's an incredible story. So what does this do to the timeline of Adam and Eve? It must have changed everything.
It solves the paradox completely. With this new, much deeper root for the male tree, the Stanford study and others recalibrated the age of Y chromosomal Adam. The new consensus puts him somewhere between 120,000 and 156,000 years ago.
Okay, let me get this straight. Eve is estimated at 99,000 to 148,000 years ago.
Correct.
And the new Adam is 120,000 to 156,000 years ago.
Precisely.
The ranges now overlap.
They overlap beautifully. The paradox that stood for decades was resolved by one family's curiosity.
So genetic Adam and genetic Eve could have walked the earth at the same time.
They could have. Now, we should be clear, it's still incredibly unlikely they were a couple who met and had children.
Right. They could have lived thousands of miles apart in different parts of Africa and never even known the other existed.
Absolutely. But they are no longer separated by vast chasms of time. They are, roughly speaking, contemporaries.
That's a huge shift in our understanding. It makes the human family feel a lot closer, somehow. But speaking of closeness, that brings us to the next big topic in our stack, bottlenecks.
Yes. This is crucial for understanding why we are all so genetically similar in the first place.
Because compared to other animals, especially other great apes, humans are surprisingly similar, aren't we?
We are shockingly uniform. You could take two chimpanzees from neighboring troops in the same forest in Central Africa, and they might have more genetic difference between them than a human from Norway and a human from, say, Papua New Guinea.
That is mind-blowing. Why are we so uniform?
Because we nearly went extinct, probably several times. We passed through what geneticists call population bottlenecks.
The sources use the analogy of marbles in a funnel, which I thought was really good.
It's a perfect analogy. Imagine a huge jar full of marbles of all different colors: red, blue, green, yellow, purple, orange. That's a genetically diverse population.
Right, lots of variation.
Now, you turn that jar upside down and pour the marbles through a very narrow funnel into a new jar. Only a few marbles can get through at a time. It's a tight squeeze.
A bottleneck.
A bottleneck. And by sheer chance, maybe only the red and blue marbles happen to fall through before you start pouring. The new population in the second jar will only be composed of red and blue marbles.
And the green, yellow, purple, and orange variations are lost forever.
Gone. That's a population bottleneck. A drastic reduction in population size that results in a drastic random reduction of genetic diversity.
And humans have gone through several of these.
Several. The most famous one, and the one we have the clearest evidence for, is the out-of-Africa bottleneck. when a small group of modern humans, maybe just a few hundred or a few thousand individuals, left Africa to colonize the rest of the world, about 50,000 to 80,000 years ago.
They were the marbles that made it through the funnel.
Exactly. They carried only a tiny fraction of the total genetic diversity present in Africa at the time.
Which explains why there is actually more genetic diversity within Africa today than in the rest of the world combined.
Correct. All non-African populations are essentially a genetic subset of African diversity. We are all descended from that one small founding group.
But there are theories of even more severe bottlenecks, right, where the total human population on Earth dropped to dangerously low numbers.
Yes. And this is where it gets a little more speculative, but the genetic data does point to something dramatic happening.
The Toba catastrophe theory, I've heard of this. A supervolcano.
Yes, around 75,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano in what is now Indonesia erupted. And this was a world-changing event, arguably the largest volcanic eruption in the last 25 million years.
Good lord.
The theory, which was proposed back in the 90s, was that this eruption was so massive it caused a volcanic winter. It blocked out the sun for years, causing local temperatures to plummet, killing off plants and animals.
And humans?
And humans. The theory suggested it decimated the human population, reducing our total numbers to maybe 10,000 or even as few as 1,000 to 3,000 breeding pairs.
That's dangerously close to extinction.
Yeah.
That's a population of a small university town deciding the fate of an entire species.
It is. However, I have to point out, as our sources do, that this specific theory is pretty controversial now.
Oh, it is?
Yes. More recent archaeological and paleoclimate data has challenged the idea that the climate impact was quite that globally severe, or that the population drop can be pinned solely on that one volcano. But here's the thing. Regardless of the specific cause, whether it was Toba or just a long, brutal period of glaciation and drought that was already happening, the genetic data does show a period of very, very low effective population size. Some models, called the long bottleneck, suggest we might have hovered around 2,000 to 10,000 individuals for a very long time in our deep past.
2,000 people. That is just terrifyingly small.
It's a razor's edge. Essentially, we are an endangered species that got lucky.
But there's another bottleneck mentioned in the sources that I found even more fascinating, because it wasn't about a volcano or an ice age. It wasn't environmental. It was about culture. The Neolithic Y-Chromosome bottleneck.
Ah, yes. This is a much more recent discovery from around 2015. It's a very strange one. This bottleneck happened much later, around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago during the Neolithic period. And it was unique because it only affected men.
Only men. How does that work? How can you have a bottleneck for just one sex?
It's bizarre, right? The genetic diversity on the Y chromosome across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East just crashed. It plummeted. It dropped so low that the data implies that for every 17 women who were reproducing and passing on their genes, only one man was doing the same.
One man for every 17 women. That sounds exhausting for that one guy. But seriously, what could possibly cause that? That's not a natural disaster.
No. The leading theory is that it was a cultural disaster, or, depending on your perspective, a cultural transformation.
Yeah.
This was the period of the rise of agriculture and civilization.
When we stopped being hunter-gatherers.
Exactly. When humans shifted to farming, we started accumulating wealth for the first time. Land, cattle, resources. And with wealth came power structures and social stratification.
The haves and the have-nots.
Exactly. Suddenly, you had powerful kinship groups, patrilineal clans, or individual chieftains who could monopolize resources and, by extension, monopolize reproduction. A small number of powerful men and their sons sons fathered a huge number of children.
While all the other men were left out in the cold.
Completely. They were either excluded from the gene pool due to poverty or low status, or, more grimly, they were killed. This period coincides with a rise in organized, brutal warfare between these newly formed clans.
So if a rival clan wipes out all the men in a village but absorbs the women,
all of those male lineages, all those unique Y chromosomes, are extinguished instantly.
So this wasn't nature trying to kill us. This was us doing it to ourselves. This was inequality written directly into our genome.
Precisely. It's a stark and frankly chilling reminder that culture leaves a biological footprint. The way we organize our society literally changes the genetic makeup of future generations.
It puts a whole new spin on the history of civilization. But even with these bottlenecks, we humans aren't the worst off in the animal kingdom. The sources gave some examples of animals that have it way, way worse.
Oh, absolutely. If you want to see what a truly catastrophic genetic bottleneck looks like, you have to look at the cheetah.
The cheetah, they seem pretty successful. The fastest land animal.
They are fast, but genetically they are barely hanging on. Cheetahs went through at least 2 severe bottlenecks. One around 10,000 years ago during the last ice age, and another more recently due to hunting. The result is that they are practically clones of one another.
How close are we talking? Like siblings?
Closer. You can take a skin graft from one cheetah and patch it onto another, completely unrelated cheetah, and the recipient's immune system won't reject it.
That is insane.
Yeah.
Usually for a human organ transplant, you need a near-perfect match or the body will violently attack the foreign tissue.
Right. In humans, that would be impossible unless you were identical twins. But cheetahs are so genetically uniform that their bodies literally can't tell the difference between self and other.
And that's bad.
It's terrible. It makes them incredibly vulnerable. One virus, one new disease could sweep through the entire population and wipe them all out because there's no genetic variation to provide different levels of resistance. Everyone has the same weak spot.
And what about the northern elephant seals? That was another one.
A classic case. In the 1890s, they were hunted to the brink of extinction for their blubber. The entire population was reduced to maybe 30 individuals.
30?
From those 30 animals, the population has rebounded to hundreds of thousands. A great conservation success story, right?
That sounds like it.
But genetically, they're still in trouble because their social structure is extremely polygynous. The dominant bulls, the beach masters, will fight to control a harem of up to 100 females.
So it's like the Neolithic bottleneck, but with seals.
Exactly. A few males are doing all the reproducing, so even though the population number is high, the genetic diversity remains dangerously low.
And then there's the bird, the black robin. That story was unbelievable.
The black robin of the Chatham Islands. This is a story of survival against all odds. In 1980, the entire species was down to 5 individuals.
5 birds.
5 birds. And of those 5, only one single female, a bird the conservationist named Old Blue, was fertile.
Old Blue. No pressure blue.
I know, right? Every single black robin alive today, and there are hundreds now, again, thanks to incredible conservation efforts, is a descendant of that one female, Old Blue. That is the ultimate bottleneck.
It's amazing they survived at all. It really highlights why this genetic diversity we've been talking about actually matters. We need that variation to survive changes in the world.
It's everything. Variation is the raw material of evolution. It's the toolkit of survival. If the environment changes, if a new disease appears, if the climate shifts, you want a population with a wide range of different traits, different strengths and weaknesses, so that someone is likely to survive.
So we've talked about the genetic markers, mtDNA and the Y-chromosome. We've talked about how we nearly vanished. But there's another way to think about ancestry that is even more mind-bending, the genealogical, most recent common ancestor.
Yes, and this is where we have to be very, very careful to distinguish between genetic ancestry and genealogical ancestry. This is a distinction that trips a lot of people up.
Okay, lay it out for us. What's the difference?
Genetic ancestry refers to the specific pieces of DNA you actually inherited from an ancestor. As we discussed, you might have a great-great-great-great-grandmother whose specific DNA segments have been completely washed out of your genome due to that shuffling process of recombination.
Wait, hold on. Explain that. I could have a great-great-great-grandmother, and I have none of her DNA inside me.
It's not just possible, it's statistically very likely after a certain number of generations. Remember, you get 50% from your mom and 50% from your dad. But that also means you don't get 50% of their DNA.
The half that wasn't passed on.
Exactly. So you get 25% from each grandparent, 12.5% from each great-grandparent. By the time you go back about 6 or 7 generations, the amount of DNA you would theoretically inherit from any one specific ancestor becomes so small that it could easily be 0. The random shuffling just didn't happen to pick any of their particular chunks of DNA for you.
So she is my genealogical ancestor. She's on my family tree. I can trace my name back to her, but she is not my genetic ancestor.
Correct. She is a ghost ancestor in your genome. You carry none of her biological code. But that genealogical tree, the family tree itself, it just keeps expanding exponentially. 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 1632.
By the time you go back 30 or 40 generations, the number of ancestors you should have in those slots is in the billions or trillions.
Right. It theoretically exceeds the number of people who have ever lived, let alone the number who were alive at that time.
Which is a mathematical impossibility. We didn't have trillions of people on Earth in the Middle Ages.
Right. So the only way the math works is if the branches of your family tree start looping back and connecting with themselves. It's a concept called pedigree collapse.
Pedigree collapse.
Your maternal great-great-grandfather is also your paternal great-great-great-uncle, and so on. We are all incredibly inbred if you look back far enough. Our family tree is less of a tree and more of a tangled web or a diamond shape.
So if we trace this genealogical web back, not looking for a specific piece of DNA, but just for any ancestral link, when do we find the person that everyone on Earth today is descended from?
This is the truly shocking part, the part that sounds like science fiction. Mathematical models by researchers like Joseph Chang and later expanded by Rode and Olson suggest this individual lived extremely recently.
How recently?
We are talking maybe 2,000 to 5,000 years ago.
Wait. Stop. Say that again?
The most recent common genealogical ancestor of every single person alive today likely lived as recently as 2,000 to 5,000 years ago.
2,000 years ago. That's roughly the time of the Roman Empire. That's the time of Jesus. That's the Han Dynasty in China.
Yes.
You were telling me there was a person, some farmer or merchant or soldier, living during the time of Caesar Augustus, who is a direct ancestor of every single person alive today. Me, you, a person in an uncontacted tribe in the Amazon, a person in Tokyo, a person in Antarctica.
The models say yes. Now, again, they might not be a genetic ancestor to everyone. Their DNA might be completely gone from most of us. But genealogically, they are on everyone's family tree somewhere.
How is that even possible? What about geographically isolated people? How did that person's lineage get to the Americas or Australia before Columbus? Those places were separated by oceans.
It seems impossible, but it just takes time and a tiny amount of migration. The models show that you only need one person crossing a land bridge, one person in a boat sailing from Indonesia to Australia, one trader moving along the Silk Road to link up these massive family trees.
One connection is all it takes.
One connection. Once a lineage from one continent enters a new population on another continent, it spreads with surprising speed. It's viral.
Yeah.
Once a person enters a new group and has children, their lineage tends to spread until, after 1,000 years or so, it's statistically almost certain that everyone in that group is descended from them.
That is just, it's hard to wrap my head around. It makes the world feel incredibly small.
And it gets even crazier. There's a concept that the models predict called the identical ancestors point, or the IAP.
Okay.
If you go back just a bit further in time, maybe 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, around the dawn of written history, you reach a point in the past where everyone alive back then falls into one of only two categories, no exception.
And what are the two categories?
Category A, they have no living descendants today, their line died out completely. Or Category B, they are the ancestor of every single person living today.
There is no middle ground. You can't be the ancestor of just, say, all Europeans, but not Asians.
Not that far back, no. The math of sexual reproduction and migration dictates that once your lineage spreads enough, it eventually captures the whole population. Before the identical ancestors point, there are people who are ancestors to some of us, but not others. But after that point, it's all or nothing.
We don't have separate family trees. We have one massive, tangled, global bush.
One bush. That's a great way to put it.
That completely dismantles the idea of race or distinct biological groups, doesn't it? If we all share all the same ancestors from just a few thousand years ago.
It really does. It shows how biologically shallow those concepts are. Underneath, geography is recent. We are a very young species, and we have been mixing and migrating constantly. The differences we see, skin color, facial features, they're recent superficial adaptations to local environments. But genealogically, we are practically siblings.
So what does this all mean? We started this journey with Adam and Eve, these ancient, almost mythical figures from 150,000 years ago. We found out they might have actually been contemporaries. We found out our species barely survived some massive bottlenecks. And now we find out that our entire family tree collapses into a single point just a few thousand years ago.
I think it paints a picture of incredible resilience and profound connection. We are the survivors. Every single person listening to this right now is the end result of an unbroken chain of lucky mothers and lucky fathers who survived ice ages, supervolcanoes, pandemics, wars, and massive social upheavals.
We are the ones who made it through all those funnels.
We are. And at the same time, it shows that any idea of fundamental separation between different groups of people is a fiction. It's a genealogical absurdity.
And it changes how I think about Adam and Eve. They aren't these fixed statues in a museum. They are, as you said, titles.
Exactly. The title moves. If a lineage dies out today, the title of Mitochondrial Eve jumps forward in time.
Which leads me to a final and slightly provocative thought from all this. If the title keeps moving forward, as lineages inevitably die out in the future, that means the future Adam or Eve is alive right now, isn't he? Or she?
Statistically, it's not just possible, it's a near certainty. There is someone walking around today, maybe listening to this deep dive right now, whose descendants, far in the future, will eventually be the only humans left.
Wait, explain that. How could that happen?
Well, if we project into the deep future, let's say 1,000,000 years from now, assuming we're still around, it is statistically likely that everyone alive then will trace their pure maternal ancestry back to a single woman alive today, and their pure paternal ancestry to a single man. Everyone else's pure mtDNA and Y-chromosome lines will have, eventually, through that game of chance, gone extinct or merged.
So you could be the next Y-chromosomal Adam. Or I could be the descendant of the next mitochondrial Eve.
Or the guy who made your coffee this morning could be the one. In 1,000,000 years, future geneticists might look back at the early 21st century and pinpoint him as the great-great-great-grandfather of the entire future human race.
And now there is something to chew on during your commute. Who is the next Adam? Who is the next Eve? It could be anyone.
It's a lottery that takes 1,000,000 years to draw the winning numbers.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into our own family tree. It's messy, it's complicated, it's mind-bending, but it's ours.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.